Here's the important things you need to know about Avatar, the 2009 science fiction blockbuster from James Cameron. Avatar was a landmark film for a number of different reasons. Among other things, at the time of its initial run, it became the largest grossing film of all time, ultimately taking in more than $2.7 billion in worldwide box office receipts. The film addresses some important issues, which we'll talk about in this lecture, though its success at the box office was largely due to its groundbreaking technology, especially in the use of 3D imagery. People all over the world were flocking to see this film just to see the 3D cinematography. Cameron has been working on sequels to the film ever since. Though they keep getting put off and put off and put off, but hopefully they'll start appearing soon. These much anticipated sequels are also expected to push the boundaries of filmmaking technology, and I think Cameron has been pretty open about the fact that he's making these films almost as more as demonstrations of technology than just as films. Avatar itself is a very high concept science fiction film that employs a number of important science fiction ideas. It involves the idea of interstellar space travel, for example. The title refers to high-tech avatars that allow humans to operate in bodies that replicate those of the native inhabitants of the planet Pandora. Basically, Pandora is very inhospitable to humans, and so humans have trouble operating there without special equipment, and the equipment they've come up with that's most effective is to create these artificial bodies that are essentially identical to the bodies of the Na'vi, the native inhabitants of the planet. So there's also lots of high-tech military hardware in the film. And of course, ultimately, in some ways, the most impressive science fictional technology in the film is the technology of the film itself. The central theme of the film, though, is an environmentalist one. The planet Pandora is being mined for the rare mineral unobtainium. And of course, the irresponsible mining methods used to extract this unobtainium threaten to destroy the environment of Pandora, just as Earth's environment has already been destroyed. You had to kind of look for it in the film. This is barely mentioned, but the film does clearly indicate that Earth's environment has been pretty much destroyed by this time. Meanwhile, also very, very important is the fact that the rights of the native inhabitants of the planet Pandora are being ignored in the quest to obtain this unobtainium. The film contains an almost cliched critique of the military. We have this character, Colonel Quaritch, who in some ways seems to be a perfect representation of the military mentality in a negative sense. He lacks the sense of noble mission that the protagonist Sully associates with the military, and instead seems interested in pure power and in asserting his dominance over the Na'vi and over Pandora. You'll note his racist hatred for the Na'vi, whom he regards as an other to be defeated or removed. The film also involves a certain amount of critique of capitalism, which is a bit ironic given how much money the movie made, and given that the movie clearly was designed to make a lot of money. Within the film, though, the entire project of mining on Pandora is also primarily designed to make money. And one of the film's suggestions is that the company involved in extracting this unobtainium is willing to do anything and everything in the interest of increasing its profits. Their chief administrator, Parker Selfridge, is unwilling to let the Na'vi stand in the way of his assigned mission. He doesn't seem quite as evil or racist as Quaritch, but basically he just wants to make money. When Grace Augustine, a scientist who's presented very positively within the film, complains about the company's tactics, he explains to her that unobtainium sells for $20 million a kilo, and is thus far too valuable to let the Na'vi or concerns about the ecology of Pandora stand in the way of its extraction. One of the things that Avatara seeks to do is to draw parallels between the ideologies of colonialism and of environmental destruction. The film makes it clear that the ideology of colonialism is part of the same ideology that drives destruction of the natural environment. In both cases, a conquering power regards nature as its own property simply because it has superior power to do with as it pleases, even if that nature is already inhabited by others. In Avatar, though, the question is, does this ideological critique really work effectively, or is it just kind of perfunctory? Is it just sort of thrown in a very cliched way as a way of just giving Cameron a story to tell so that he can use his technology? Again, you can decide these sort of questions for yourselves as you watch the film, but these are questions that have certainly been asked about the film. It's pretty clear, however you feel about the film in general, that it does contain some pretty cliched plot points. You have your protagonist, Sully, who's a paraplegic and who's sort of liberated because he gets this new body in the form of his avatar. And that also sort of liberates his consciousness because he's become very cynical and bitter, and suddenly now he experiences this new body and begins to feel better about things and to appreciate the way that the Na'vi feel about the environment of Pandora. He also has a love affair with Neytiri, the native girl, if you will, the Na'vi girl, which is a little bit cliched and sentimental. And of course, the whole notion of these white saviors, including Sully and Augustine and their allies who side with the Na'vi, is itself very problematic. One of the things to look for in the film is the way that the Na'vi are quite obviously based on Native Americans. Their attitude toward nature resembles that of Native Americans in many ways, and many aspects of their culture are clearly derived from Native American culture. Meanwhile, their treatment by white invaders of their land resembles the treatment experienced by Native Americans. And you also see that even at the visual level, their costuming in particular is designed to evoke Native Americans. But the Na'vi aren't simply Native Americans. They're also, I think, intended to evoke the Vietnamese as a secondary parallel. The invasion of Pandora resembles the American invasion of Vietnam in many ways. Much of the military hardware and many of the tactics used clearly evoke Vietnam. Note that the parallels between Native Americans and the Vietnamese that are therefore suggested in this film had already become a staple of American film by the 1970s, where there were a number of Western films that allegorically commented on Vietnam. And again, you can see visual parallels between Vietnam and Pandora. On the left here, you see the vehicles that are used to attack the Na'vi in the film. They look very much like helicopters of the kind that were the iconic in the war in Vietnam. On the right here, you see the famous helicopter scene from Apocalypse Now, probably the greatest of all Vietnam War films. And finally, for science fiction films, be on the lookout for that character, Dr. Augustine, because she's played by Sigourney Weaver, who's an iconic figure in science fiction film because of her role as Ripley in the Alien films.